transactions take place. Now, we require the Minister of Internal Affairs to approve any payments that are going to be made by agents of foreigners to foreigners. In real-time payments, straight-through processing, at what point does the Minister of Internal Affairs come in? When we have digital. Unless we're going to say that let's stop digital and go back to manual. Honorable Member of Parliament, it's your judgment. Now, we think that technical incompatibility, the manual ministerial reporting and approval processes are technically incompatible with the velocity of digital finance. Now, then there are other things like the constitutional order, socioeconomic scale. Parliamentary records indicate that approximately 5 trillion shillings in external funding and between 20,000 and 50,000 Ugandan jobs are tied to organizations, and these are currently at risk. Now, also the international standings, like the IMF Article 8 of free movement of financial flows, then the East African Community Common Market Protocol on free movement of capital. All this is going to be affected. What happens to these international obligations? And then the risk-based approach that is required for Uganda to stay on the Financial Action Task Force grey list. What happens if we are going to have blanket regulations instead of the risk-based approach that is recommended? So Uganda's obligations set out in various international conventions and treaties with bodies including the IMF, World Bank, IADB, IFC, etc., whose articles of agreement, including those relating to privileges and immunities, are going to be affected by this bill. So what I was, in conclusion, Honorable Chairman, what are the strategic recommendations for the legislative requirement? To ensure that the bill is consistent with Uganda's long-term stability, the Bank of Uganda recommends the following refinements. 1. Affirmation of regulatory primacy. Confirm that the Bank of Uganda retains exclusive authority for the regulation and supervision of the financial sector, supported by Financial Intelligence Authority for anti-money laundering and combating financing of terrorism matters. These institutions already are operating effectively under well-established statutory mandates, and reaffirming their primacy would preserve the regulatory coherence and accountability, avoid geo-licensing and inspection, maintain operational independence, and ensure international compliance. And then also retain government oversight on foreign funding for political parties under the Political Parties Organization Act as amended, which already excludes remittances, legitimate financial transactions, and other cross-border transactions between Ugandan citizens and regulated entities. Then the second recommendation that we are making is the explicit exemption for regulated entities. Categorically exclude financial institutions licensed under the Financial Institutions Act, the National Payment Systems Act, supervised by the Capital Markets Authority, from definition of agent of a foreigner. Such institutions are already subject to rigorous prudential oversight and governance requirements, making additional classification unnecessary and counterproductive. This aligns with the Political Parties Organization Act. And then the revision of the funding thresholds. Maybe replace approval threshold with disclosure only requirement for transactions undertaken in a normal course of banking. And then also exempt interbank transactions, shareholding arrangements, credit lines, and FDI touching supervised financial institutions as exempted under the Political Parties Organization Act. And let's narrow the definition of economic sabotage. So redraft clause 13 to exclude legitimate economic research, remove various criminality liabilities for directors as in clause 23 subsection 3, introduce defense of good faith, exercise of mandate, compulsion of statute by law, and then alignment with other existing frameworks. Again, channel all oversight through the Financial Intelligence Authority. So, and we also request that maybe you clarify the bill's relationship with the existing financial laws. How do they relate with the FIA, AMLA, NPS Act, PPO, to avoid redundant or conflicting reporting lines? So in conclusion, Chairman, true national sovereignty is built on economic strength and financial independence. While the goal of protecting national interests is legitimate, the protection of the Sovereign Bill 2026 as currently drafted risks reversing 3 decades of successful financial development through liberalization that has sustained economic growth. By adopting these technical refinements, we believe that Parliament can safeguard the nation without compromising the world-class financial architecture essential for Uganda's journey to achieve the 500 billion economy. Where you asked us to review the bill's provisions, its interaction with the existing frameworks, and the anticipated legal, economic, social, and diplomatic implications. So here we are presenting this bill, knowing that Bank of Uganda, in the fulfillment of its constitutional mandate as the primary steward of monetary and financial stability, we are submitting this technical assessment regarding the protection of the Sovereignty Bill 2026. Chairman, allow me by quoting Article 189 of the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda, which prescribes that the function and the services of that are specified in the 6th schedule of the Constitution, including banks, banking, promissory notes, currency and exchange controls, shall be the responsibility of government. And Para 3 of the 6th schedule explicitly reserves these functions for the government, while Para 11 and 12 address the foreign relations and external trade. Now, compare that with Article 162 of the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda, which, when read together with Section 4 of the Bank of Uganda Act, Chapter 54, and Section 143 of the Financial Institutions Act 2004, the government of Uganda, by establishing the central bank as a statutory body, has delegated its functions under the Constitution to the central bank and given it the constitutional and regulatory primacy over all matters concerning the formulation and implementation of monetary policy directed to economic objectives of achieving and maintaining economic stability for the Republic of Uganda and on behalf of the government of Uganda. Now, Article 162, subsection 2 of the Constitution clearly protects the Bank of Uganda from being subject to direction or control of any person or authority in performing its functions. Therefore, any legislative or administrative action that introduces parallel oversight or restricts the operational independence of the Bank of Uganda risks contravening these constitutional provisions and undermining the legal and institutional framework for the financial sector governance. And Chair, in addition, with respect to matters concerning financial institutions, the Financial Institutions Act takes precedence over any enactment, and in case of conflict, it shall prevail. So that's the basis on which we are going to make our technical assessment. Now, we also note that for the avoidance of any doubt, Bank of Uganda is established to protect the national sovereignty from foreign interference as enshrined in section in Part 4 of the Bank of Uganda Act. And here I was saying, however, while protecting that national sovereignty is a paramount constitutional objective, the financial system's technical architecture must remain shielded from regulatory fragmentation. This assessment argues that the bill in its current form risks introducing regulatory fragmentation and subjecting this economy to voluntary shocks, potentially undermining the very economic strength upon which true national sovereignty is built. Now, Chair, let me look at the technical review of the legislative provision and the regulatory alignment. Here, I'm going to look at what are the core principles and the key provisions that we are going to address. Now, the bill designates the Department of Peace and Security in the Ministry of Internal Affairs as the central regulator for agents of foreigners. Its primary technical mechanisms include, in Clause 1, expansive definition, where an agent of a foreigner is defined, and then it also introduces the cabinet gatekeeping under Clause 6, which prohibits any agents of a foreigner from performing the functions or the services for which government is responsible. And then the other one is to do with the mandatory registration, which is in clause number 14, that requires entities to register with the Ministry of Internal Affairs and obtain a certificate valid for 2 years. And then there is another clause, 22, which is foreign funding restrictions, that imposes a cap of 400 million shillings, that is 20,000 currency points. And then the other clause 23, subsection 3, the vicarious liabilities, the penalties. And then clause number 25, the enforcement via financial institutions, which prohibits banks from paying out funds to foreign agents without verifying ministerial authorization, and the civil penalty of 4 billion Uganda shillings for non-compliance. And then, Chairman, the one that concerns us is economic sabotage, which is clause number 13, which criminalizes the publication of information that weakens or damages the economic system and is punishable by up to 20 years in prison. So, we are now going to go through clause by clause technical assessment. Here, we are noting the key conflicts between the bill's provisions and the existing financial regulatory framework as highlighted in the table below. So, we cite the clause, the key issue, the conflict, and our recommendation for refinement. The first one is defining what an agent of a foreigner is. The key issue is that this bill has broadly defined it. It captures even own fintechs, Uganda's abroad, and then the conflict with the existing framework is that it overlaps with the Bank of Uganda Prudential Supervision under the Financial Institutions Act 2004. So what are we recommending as a refinement? We think that we should exempt supervised financial institutions licensed by Bank of Uganda, Capital Markets Authority, or development finance institutions from this provision. And then the registration requirement, the dual licensing of SFIs must, where they say that SFIs must register with the Ministry of Internal Affairs. We think that this is creating regulatory arbitrage. So we are proposing as a refinement, we carve out a carve-out for the supervised financial institutions, licensed and supervised by Bank of Uganda. And then clause number 16, the suitability inquiries. And here, the provision of mental, fiscal, and health checks for directors. That's what is in the bill. We think that it does exceed Bank of Uganda's fit and proper standards, which may deter qualified professionals. So we want to align it to Bank of Uganda's framework or remove the health inquiries. Now, the rest, in the interest of time, can be read. But let me now look at the interaction and conflicts with existing frameworks, the parallel regulatory regime that overlaps with the established mandates, creating dual licensing. The first one is constitutional. Article 162 of the Constitution, which mandates Bank of Uganda to promote development and maintain independence. Now, if you interact with the bill introduces ministerial oversight that conflicts with the Bank of Uganda's exclusive mandate. And then the Financial Institutions Act 2004, the prudential supervision of fit and proper vetting. Clause number 14 creates a dual licensing. It also introduces overlapping suitability in clause number 16. And in the National Payment Systems Act 2020, the oversight of cross-border transfers and payment providers is a core function and mandate of the central bank. But what this bill is now proposing that under clause 25, it imposes gatekeeping duties and a 4 billion civil penalty on the providers. And then the Anti-Money Laundering Act, the source of funds and violations reporting are all covered under the Financial Intelligence Authority. But clause number 21 creates a parallel reporting channel, public inspection of declaration, which violates the banking secrecy. And then the other one is to do with the Political Parties and Organizations Act, which restricts contribution from foreign sources to political parties to 20,000 currency points within the period of 12 months. And so it also prohibits political parties from demanding equivalent of 200,000 currency points. So we are seeing that the interaction with the proposed bill is that Section 13 has similar restrictions as introduced in the proposed bill, which are only limited to political parties. Now, Chair, let me go to the most important aspect of our presentation. That is, what are the comprehensive assessments of this bill? Chairman, let me be very clear from the outset. This bill is about cross-border payments. And cross-border payments is about the balance of payments, because the balance of payments is a comprehensive record of all economic transactions between a country's residents and the rest of the world over a given period of time. It tracks the inflows and outflows of money from trade in goods, services, and financial assets. The balance of payments is divided into current account balance and the financial account, and of course the capital account. Now, what is the case of Uganda? The case of Uganda is that the current account balance has always been in the negative because our imports are far much greater than exports. So how do we close this? It's through financial flows. Financial flows into the financial account. And where these financial flows exceed the deficit in the current account, that's how we build reserves. Now, what is this bill doing? This bill is bringing restrictions into cross-border transactions, meaning that it is bringing restrictions on the inflows to this country. And we run a risk